Look at you. Do you look like the son of a billionaire? You're not his heir. You're the son of a beggar trying to wear a king's name.
At a billionaire's wedding, a beggar boy begs to see the groom, his father. Laughter answers him. But before the night ends, the truth will bury every smile in silence. Please, I just want to see my father. The voice trembled beneath the roar of celebration. Rain from the early afternoon still clung to the marble steps of Palm Grove Resort, where the rich had gathered to witness love turn into legacy. Inside, golden lights sparkled like promises. Laughter spilled from the banquet hall like champagne. But outside the tall white gates, barefoot and trembling, a young man stood in rags, his face streaked with dust and tears. His father, a guard sneered. "Boy, do you even know who you're talking about?" "I know him," the young man whispered. "His name is Adabio Andrews." The laughter that followed cut through him sharper than hunger ever had. The guards shoved him back into the mud, but he didn't rise to fight. He clutched a torn wedding flyer to his chest, the only proof of a hope he'd walked 100 miles to chase. He stared at the man printed beside the beautiful bride. Older, grayer, but those eyes, he'd seen them before in his dreams. They were the same eyes that once smiled down at him in a garden, filled with sunlight and butterflies. The boy's name was Amir. The story of Amir and his father began long before this day of shame, in the grand estate of Mr. Adabio Andrews, a man whose name commanded respect from Lagos to London. Wealth was not merely possession, it was power wrapped in gold. But for all his riches, Adabio's joy once came from one small heartbeat that echoed through the house like music. His son, Amir, was light. Born late in his parents' lives after years of quiet prayers, he was the blessing that made every dawn softer and every sunset golden. He was a curious child, bold, gentle, filled with a kind of laughter that made servants smile even on the hardest days. His mother would say, "God hid a son inside that boy's chest," and his father would laugh, pressing a kiss to his son's forehead. Then let him shine forever. But forever is a fragile word. It happened on a day that smelled of rain and hibiscus. Amir was 12, chasing a bright red kite across the garden, his mother watching from the veranda. She called out to him, her laughter mixing with the wind. He waved back, and in that single blink between joy and distraction, the kite dipped beyond the gates. He followed it. That was the last time anyone saw him. The house that had always echoed with laughter turned silent overnight. Servants whispered prayers. Police sirens wailed, and Adabio Andrews, a man who could buy silence with a word, found himself begging the heavens instead. Posters filled the city. Helicopters scanned forests. Every port, every checkpoint, every whisper in the underworld was paid for in gold. But the boy was gone. Vanished into the kind of silence that mocks wealth and mercy alike. Days turned to weeks. Weeks melted into months, and months into years. At first, hope lived like a stubborn flame in his mother's eyes. She would sit at Amir's window each morning, waiting for his footsteps on the gravel. But grief is patient. It eats slowly. She stopped eating. Then she stopped talking. Then she simply stopped being. Her death came quietly like dusk slipping into night. They said her heart failed, but Adabio knew better. Her heart hadn't failed. It had followed their son. When the funeral ended, he stood beside the coffin and whispered, "I buried my soul twice, once in the garden, once today." The man who left that graveside was no longer the titan of Lagos. He became a shadow moving through his mansion, an empire of glass and ghosts. His eyes, once fierce, turned hollow. The world outside kept spinning, but inside those walls, time froze on the day the laughter died. Years passed. Pain dulled, but never left. Adabio stopped attending meetings, stopped smiling, stopped trusting joy. He spoke only to his reflection and to the portrait of his lost family that hung in his study, a painting he had commissioned the year before the tragedy. In it, Amir sat on his father's lap, both of them smiling, unaware that life was watching from the corner, waiting to strike. One night, his business partner, desperate to pull him out of despair, convinced him to attend a charity gala. And that's where she appeared. Rodina. She entered the room like a flame entering darkness. Beautiful, commanding, and deliberate. Her eyes sparkled not with kindness, but calculation. Yet to a man who had forgotten warmth, even fire looked like salvation. Rodina did not speak of his loss. She spoke of art, politics, legacy. She made him laugh, the dry, brittle laugh of someone remembering how. And when she left, she took with her a piece of the silence that had been his only companion. Slowly, she returned again and again, at fundraisers, in board meetings, at charity dinners, until her presence became familiar, comforting. Where grief had built walls, she brought doors, or so he thought. 3 years later, on a clear Saturday afternoon, the city buzzed with one name. Adabio Andrews is marrying again. The man who had buried his heart was finally stepping back into the light, and all of Lagos celebrated the resurrection of its king. But fate, the old storyteller, was not done. Because while the rich prepared champagne and speeches somewhere beyond the glittering skyline, a young man woke beneath a bridge with dust in, his throat and fire in his heart, the same fire that had once burned in the halls of that mansion, the same fire that refused to die in the shadows of the forgotten. Amir opened his eyes to a son he hadn't seen in years. His feet were bare, his hands scarred, but in his pocket was a crumpled poster, the wedding announcement. His father's face. The man whose name had become myth whispered in every home. He pressed the paper to his chest and said to no one, "You're alive, and I'm coming home." He walked for 2 days beneath the burning sky, his strength carved from hunger and hope. When he finally reached Palm Grove Resort, the gates looked like the entrance to heaven itself, tall, white, and cruelly distant. The guards looked down on him as though poverty was contagious. But Amir didn't flinch. He showed them the poster. His voice cracked. That man is my father," they laughed. "Your father? That's the richest man in Lagos. You're mad." And before he could plead, a woman's voice cut through the air. Sharp, cold, dripping with contempt. "What is this filth doing at my wedding?" Every head turned. The bride, Rodina, stepped forward in a gown so white it mocked the dust on Amir's skin. Her eyes held no mercy, only fury at the audacity of a beggar interrupting her moment of glory, the guests whispered. Phones raised, laughter rippled like poison through the crowd. Amir tried to speak, but the words drowned in the roar of humiliation. He lifted the poster one last time. "Please, just tell him his son is here." Rodina snatched the poster, glanced at it, and tore it in half. "You?" she spat. "The son of Adabio Andrews? You're nothing but dirt pretending to dream." She turned to the guards. "Remove this trash, now." And as they dragged Amir away, the crowd laughed louder, unaware that the beggar they mocked carried the bloodline that could destroy them all. "Please, I just want to see my father." Those were the words that echoed even as the doors to paradise shut on him, the words that would soon turn celebration into chaos, and a wedding into judgment. In the heart of Lagos, where wealth grew tall as glass towers and power spoke in whispers, there stood a mansion that once pulsed with laughter. It wasn't the laughter of servants or guests, nor of business partners sealing deals with polished smiles. It was the laughter of a boy, a sound so pure it could soften the hardest boardroom heart. Amir Andrews was born late into luxury. His father, Adabio Andrews, had conquered steel, oil, and politics, but none of those victories could compare to the day he held his son for the first time. He had whispered, "My legacy has a heartbeat now." His wife, gentle Lydia, had wept that day, tears of joy that glistened on her face like morning dew on hibiscus petals. The mansion came alive with songs, drums, and blessings. Every elder who saw Amir's newborn face said the same thing. This one will walk with both grace and thunder. From the beginning, Amir carried light inside him. He was the kind of child who found beauty in everything. The ants that marched along the marble tiles, the ripples in the koi pond, the servants who smiled despite their weariness. He would sneak into the kitchen and steal plantain chips, giggling as the cooks chased him through the halls. At dusk, he'd crawl into his father's lap, listening to stories of courage and sacrifice. "Son," Adabio would say, "power is not in the hands that hold gold, but in the heart that fears God." And Amir, eyes wide, would nod solemnly, though he barely understood. He just liked hearing his father's voice rumble like distant thunder. Lydia, meanwhile, prayed over him every night. "Let him grow humble even among kings," she whispered. "Let him know love before wealth." In those years, the Andrews estate was a kingdom of light. Even the walls seemed to hum with happiness. But joy has enemies, and some of them wear patience like perfume. It happened on a Tuesday. The air was clear, the sun bright, the kind of day no one expects tragedy to love. Lydia was on the veranda, sipping Zobo while watching Amir chase a bright red kite across the garden. His laughter filled the afternoon like music. The wind caught the kite, tugging it higher until it danced above the white gates of the estate. "Don't go too far, Amir," she called, smiling. "I won't, Mama," he shouted back. But the wind had other plans. The kite soared over the gates, and Amir, innocent, fearless, ran after it. One moment he was in sunlight on green grass. Next he was gone. When Lydia looked up again, the garden was empty. The gate stood open, swinging gently in the breeze. She screamed his name until her throat broke. Servants ran. Guards searched. The entire estate erupted in panic. By the time Adabio's convoy arrived from the city, police lights already painted the driveway in red and blue. "Where is he?" Adabio demanded, grabbing the nearest guard by the collar. "Where is my son?" No one could answer. For days, helicopters circled. Billboards across Lagos glowed with Amir's face. "Missing 12-year-old boy. Reward, and 100 million. The city whispered his name like a prayer. But heaven remained silent. Weeks passed, then months, then years. Each lead led to dust. Each promise ended in disappointment. Adabio spared no expense, but money cannot bribe fate. 1 year later, Lydia began to fade. She stopped eating, stopped laughing. The house grew cold despite its chandeliers. She sat every evening by Amir's window, holding his old teddy bear, whispering his name until her voice turned to breath, and breath turned to silence. When she died, the doctor said heart failure. But Adabio knew the truth. Her heart had simply gone looking for her son. At her funeral, under the heavy gray sky, he whispered to her coffin, "You took the best part of me with you." From that day forward, he stopped being a man and became a monument, still, silent, unbreakable on the outside, but hollow within. Years slipped by like slow rain. The once lively mansion became a mausoleum of memories. Servants moved quietly, as if afraid to disturb ghosts. Adabio spent his nights staring at the portrait of his family, Lydia's soft smile, Amir's bright eyes. "Where are you, my boy?" he'd whisper to the air. But the air had no mercy. The world outside moved on. Business thrived. Stocks rose. Deals signed. To the public, Mr. Andrews remained a legend. But the man himself was a ruin held together by habit. He stopped attending social events. He refused interviews. The tycoon who once commanded empires now spoke only to the shadows in his study, until she arrived. Her name was Rodina Bello, a woman of fierce beauty and dangerous charm. She was introduced at a charity gala he had reluctantly agreed to attend. She didn't approach him with pity. She approached him with purpose. "I've always admired the way you build things that last," she told him. Her voice silk over steel. For the first time in years, someone looked at him not as a broken man but as a challenge. And Adabio, weary and lonely, mistook hunger for admiration. Rodina became the color in his gray world. She laughed where Lydia had prayed. She provoked where Lydia had soothed. But loneliness, like thirst, can make poison taste like water. Within months, She had his trust. Within a year, she had his heart. 3 years later, the city was alive with whispers. The great Adabio Andrews is marrying again. Palm Grove Resort, the finest in Lagos, was transformed into paradise. Chandeliers glowed, gold curtains swayed, and high society arrived in diamonds and pride. Inside, music swelled. Outside, a storm was brewing, not of weather, but of fate. Because while the world toasted to love's second chance, somewhere on the dusty outskirts of the city, a young man stood beneath a cracked billboard. His clothes were torn, his face weathered by years of struggle. But his eyes, they burned with memory. He looked up at that billboard and saw the man beside the bride, older, grayer, but still him. The father he never stopped dreaming about. He whispered to the wind, "I'm coming home." And for the first time in years, the universe shivered because destiny had begun to stir again. There are two kinds of silence. The first is peace, the gentle hush of dawn when the world is waiting for light. The second is grief, a silence so heavy that even the wind forgets how to move. That second kind lived inside Adabio Andrews. His mansion was full of voices once, music, laughter, prayers, but now it was a cathedral of emptiness. The air smelled of polished wood and wilted flowers. The servants walked softly, as though afraid to wake the ghosts that lingered in the halls. In his study, where empire plans once sprawled across the desk, there remained only a single picture frame, his wife and his son. Dust gathered on the glass, and yet every night he wiped it clean. He would whisper, "Good night, my boy," to a photograph that never answered back. The man who had built bridges across continents could no longer cross the distance between memory and madness. Business partners came and went, pitching projects, offering condolences he no longer needed. He gave them his signature, not his attention. At night, he would sit by the window and count the streetlights beyond the estate walls. He once told his assistant, "I count them until dawn, hoping one of them will flicker like his smile." He had stopped being a billionaire. He was simply a father, learning how to exist without purpose. Rodina Bello entered his life like a storm disguised as a breeze. Where everyone else treated him like porcelain, she treated him like firewood, something that could burn again if struck the right way. At first, she was polite, professional, a consultant from one of the charity boards his foundation funded. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had never known hunger and yet wore the charm of one who could sell a starving man his own bread. "You sit among kings, but you live like a ghost," she once said to him, her tone half pity, half challenge. He looked at her, surprised by her boldness. "No one speaks to me that way." "Then perhaps that's the problem," she replied with a smile. Something in him stirred, the faint reminder that he was still alive. Rodina was not in love. She was strategic with perfume. She learned his habits, the brand of wine he preferred, the stories that softened his tone, the names that made his eyes glisten. She wove herself into his routine with surgical precision. At board meetings, she sat beside him. At charity galas, she laughed at his old jokes as though they were gospel. When journalists asked about her, he said, "She brings light into dark rooms. But even light can deceive." The staff whispered that her eyes never smiled when her lips did. They said she moved through the house like a shadow measuring its walls. But who listens to whispers when loneliness is screaming louder? Years after Lydia's death, Adabio finally let himself believe in warmth again. He proposed on the veranda where he once watched his son play. Rodina cried, beautiful rehearsed tears, and said yes. The city rejoiced. Newspapers called it the return of the lion. The man who had buried hope was walking toward it again. But behind that celebration, something ancient stirred, a current of fate winding its way back to him, because far beyond the marble and music, a young man walked barefoot on cracked roads. Clutching a torn wedding poster, he was tired, hungry, but he kept walking. Each step was a heartbeat closer to home. As preparations for the wedding filled the mansion with life again, Adabio began to feel what he hadn't in years: purpose. He smiled when the decorators arrived. He walked through the gardens, instructing florists to fill every corner with lilies, Lydia's favorite flower. When Rodina asked why, he said softly, "So she won't feel forgotten." Rodina's smile tightened. "Of course," she said, but inside, jealousy hissed like a snake behind her ribs. She had conquered his wealth, but not his memories. That night, as Adabio slept, she stood by the window, looking out at the moonlit garden. "Even in death she stands between us," she whispered. And the moon, knowing too much, said nothing. 2 days before the wedding, Adabio received a letter, unsigned, written in shaky handwriting. "Your son is alive." At first, he laughed bitterly. Then he read it again. The words were crude, the ink smudged, but something in them made his breath hitch. He called his security chief, ordered an investigation. The next morning, they told him it was likely a hoax. Someone preying on his grief. He burned the letter. But for the first time in years, he couldn't sleep. At dawn, he walked through the garden, tracing the old path where Amir once ran after butterflies. He stopped at the gate, touching the rusted latch. For a moment, he thought he heard laughter. Faint, distant, like memory breathing again. He whispered to the wind, "If you are out there, my boy, forgive me for giving up." Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Amir dreamed. In his dream, he was small again, chasing a red kite through sunlight. He could hear his mother's voice, soft and far away. When he woke, tears clung to his eyelashes. He didn't know why he had dreamed that face. But when he saw the newspaper the next day, Adabio Andrews to wed Rodina Bello at Palm Grove Resort, something inside him cracked open like thunder. He had no memory of his past, only fragments, the scent of lilies, the sound of laughter, the feel of marble under his feet. But when he saw that face, older, tired, he knew it. Not with logic, but with the ache of a child's longing. He whispered, "Father." And thus fate, silent for 9 years, began to move again. Back at the estate, Adabio stood before his mirror adjusting his cufflinks. The wedding morning had come. The sky was gray, heavy with the promise of rain. Rodina entered, radiant and restless. "It's time," she said. He nodded but hesitated. "I feel as though something's missing," she forced a smile. "You mean someone?" He didn't answer. He just glanced at the portrait on the wall, the same one he could never take down. The boy in the painting smiled back. And for the first time in years, Adabio smiled too. But the universe, the patient storyteller, was not done. Because at that very hour, on a road littered with dust and broken glass, Amir Andrews, the boy who was light, walked barefoot toward a wedding he did not belong to, and yet was destined to change forever. Before she became the bride of a billionaire, Rodina Bello was a whisper in Lagos nightlife, beautiful, sharp, and hungry in ways that frightened men who thought themselves fearless. She came from nothing, a cracked one-room home where rain leaked through the roof and hope came only on Sundays. Her mother, a tailor with worn hands, had died before she could finish teaching Rodina humility. Her father had left long before that, chasing dreams that ended in someone else's arms. By 16, Rodina had already learned the world's cruel arithmetic. Beauty buys opportunity. Opportunity buys survival, but she wanted more than survival. She wanted a name people bowed before. She worked her way into the city's elite one party at a time, the girl with the diamond smile and eyes that could promise kingdoms. Men fell for her laughter. Women feared her silence. She understood something most never do, that power is not given. It's taken when the room isn't watching. It was at one of those glittering gatherings years ago, long before her engagement, that she first heard the name Adabio Andrews. She had seen him from afar, tall, composed, surrounded by power. A man whose silence made others speak carefully. Someone whispered, "He lost his wife and child." He doesn't speak of it. To Rodina, that wasn't tragedy. It was opportunity. Grief, she told her friend that night, is just another kind of door. You only need to know how to knock. And so she began her slow ascent, attending the charity events his foundation funded. making friends with his associates, studying his routines like a scholar studies scripture. For years, she stayed close but invisible, waiting, until the day she was introduced to him by fate, or more precisely, by the friend she had paid to arrange the meeting. The first time she shook his hand, she knew he was still broken. His grip was strong, but his eyes looked like the ocean after a storm. She smiled softly and said, "You've built half this city, Mr. Andrews, but you still look like a man searching for home." He didn't respond. But the silence lingered. That silence was her first victory. Over months, she became indispensable, his assistant's confidant, his household savior, the woman who brought color back into his monochrome world. People whispered, but she fed on whispers. Gossip was her favorite meal. Her hunger had no shame, no pause, because beneath her flawless exterior was a truth darker than anyone knew. She already had blood on her hands. Years earlier, before the world called her elegant, before she could afford silk and diamonds, Rodina had fallen for a man named Moses, a bodyguard, a streetwise fighter who knew the city's underbelly like his own pulse. Moses was loyal, brutal, and hopelessly devoted to her. But Rodina loved no one except her ambition. She used him for protection, for errands that required dirt under the fingernails she refused to soil. And one day, she used him for something worse. When she first learned of Adabio's family, his wife Lydia and his son Amir, envy curdled her charm into poison. In her mind, Lydia was everything she wanted to be, adored, serene, untouchable. She once told Moses, "A woman like that doesn't deserve all she has. People like us spend our lives in the shadows while they bathe in light." Moses, confused but obedient, said, "So what do you want me to do?" Her smile that night was thin as glass. "Nothing drastic, just remove the light." She claimed she only meant to frighten them, to shake Lydia's world enough that Adabio would reach for new comfort. Hers. But evil, once whispered, always finds its echo. The plan was simple, and simple plans are often the deadliest. Two men, both desperate for quick cash, were paid to stage a kidnapping. They were told it was temporary, a week, maybe two, a harmless disappearance to stir grief and chaos. But when the boy vanished, the world erupted. Headlines screamed, "Billionaire's son missing." Roadblocks formed, search teams deployed, and the kidnappers panicked. They fled, leaving Amir in a town miles away, alone, frightened, and forgotten. When Rodina heard the news, she went pale, but never confessed. She simply said to Moses, "This was never supposed to happen." He replied, "You told me to make them feel loss. You didn't say how much." And just like that, two souls were bound by a crime neither could ever outrun. When Lydia died, Rodina read the news with trembling hands. Then she wept, not from guilt, but from awe. "I did it," she whispered to the mirror. "The door is open." It would take her years to walk through it, years of calculated charm and feigned remorse. But she was patient. Because patience in the wrong hands becomes weaponry. Now, as she stood before the mirror on her wedding day, adjusting her diamond veil, she saw not a bride, but a queen who had built her throne from silence and sin. She whispered to her reflection, "You've won." But destiny, always listening, smiled. Because at that very moment, a boy who had survived her darkness was walking through the city gates, barefoot, ragged, but alive. And every step he took was a nail in the coffin of her illusion. She didn't know it yet, but the door she had forced open years ago would soon swing shut. And this time, it would lock from the other side. That morning, as guests began to arrive, Rodina floated through the hallways like smoke, beautiful but suffocating. Her laughter filled the air, but those who heard it said it sounded hollow, like glass clinking in an empty room. The musicians tuned their instruments. The guests raised champagne. The ceremony was about to begin. Outside, rain gathered again over the city. Soft at first, then stronger, as though the heavens were washing the dust from the road where Amir walked. And the wind whispered through the palm trees, "He's coming." Fate often chooses its moments with cruel precision. While chandeliers glowed and violins sang inside Palm Grove Resort, the sky above Lagos darkened as if mourning what no one yet knew. The clouds gathered, whispering secrets to the wind, and somewhere beyond the manicured lawns, Amir Andrews stumbled toward the gate. He was barefoot, his clothes clinging to his body after days on the road. Each step burned, but the fire inside him burned fiercer. He clutched the torn wedding poster in one hand, the ink smeared by sweat and tears. He looked at the faces printed on it. The man whose smile had haunted his dreams, and beside him, a woman whose beauty seemed carved from stone. "This is it," he whispered. "Home." The guards at the gate saw him long before he reached them. Two men in pressed uniforms, stiff as pillars, exchanged a glance of disdain. He was dust and rags in a place built for diamonds and gold. "Hey!" one barked. "You're not supposed to be here!" Amir stopped, panting, lifting the crumpled paper. "Please," he said, voice hoarse, "I need to see him." "See who?" the other guard asked, folding his arms. "The man in this picture?" Amir said, pointing to Adabio's face. "He's my father." For a heartbeat, the guards just stared. Then laughter erupted, cruel, echoing off the marble walls like mockery from the heavens themselves. "Your father?" The first guard sneered. "Boy, that man's a king." "You look like something the gutter coughed up." "Go beg somewhere else," said the other. "Before we call the police." But Amir didn't move. He dropped to his knees. "I'm not lying," he pleaded. "Please, I remember his voice, his laugh, the smell of the lilies in our garden." "Just let me talk to him. He'll know me." The laughter died into irritation. Guests were beginning to notice. Luxury cars slowed at the gate, their passengers peering curiously at the scene. And then, like a storm in silk, Rodina Bello appeared. She was radiant. Wrapped in a gown white as deception, jewels glittering like sins well hidden. Her heels struck the pavement like gunshots. The sight of the ragged boy kneeling before her gate filled her with fury. "Who allowed this filth near my wedding?" she snapped. The guard straightened immediately. "Apologies, ma'am. He claims to know Mr. Andrews." Rodina's eyes narrowed. "Oh, does he now?" Amir looked up, blinded by sunlight and humiliation. For a fleeting moment, she almost felt pity. Until he spoke again. "Please, ma'am," he said softly. "I only want to see my father." "The man you're marrying. He's my father." The air froze. Then came her laughter, sharp, beautiful, venomous. "Your father? Oh, how Lagos breeds fools. You think you can crawl out of the dirt and claim blood with kings?" The crowd that had gathered murmured. Phones appeared, ready to record. But Rodina wasn't done. "Do you know how many beggars try this trick?" she spat. "You're filth, boy!" "And filth has no father." Amir tried to speak again, but her voice cut him like a blade. "Guards," she said coldly, "teach him what happens to liars. What followed would scar every soul who witnessed it." The guards hesitated, not because they doubted her, but because something in Amir's eyes made them uneasy. It was not madness. It was recognition. But power commands obedience, and they obeyed. One grabbed Amir by the hair, jerking his head back. The other struck him in the ribs once, twice, blows heavy with borrowed cruelty. He crumpled but didn't scream. His eyes, wide and glistening, never left the gates, as though he could see the garden beyond them. "Stop!" He gasped between blows. "Please." "Just tell him I'm here!" The guests shifted, murmuring, but none stepped forward. In places of wealth, compassion often arrives too late. Rodina folded her arms, watching as if witnessing art. When blood trickled from Amir's lip, she smiled faintly. "There," she said. "Now he looks like what he is." And then, through that storm of shame, came a voice. Enough. It wasn't shouted, yet it silenced everything. Even the rain seemed to pause. The crowd parted, revealing a woman in an elegant gray suit, sharp-eyed, dignified, and radiating quiet power. Evelyn Andrews, Adabio's stepdaughter, the one who carried herself like the wind, calm until it chose to become a hurricane. She strode forward, her heels clicking against the stones. "I said stop!" The guards froze instantly. Everyone in Lagos knew that voice. Rodina's smile faltered. Evelyn, what are you doing? This is my wedding. Evelyn ignored her. She knelt beside Amir, her expensive suit soaking in the dirt, and lifted his chin gently. When their eyes met, something ancient stirred. The shape of his brow, the curve of his cheek, she knew those features. She had seen them once before in an old portrait that hung in the mansion's hall. Her lips trembled. Amir, she whispered. The boy blinked, confused. You know my name? Tears welled in her eyes. It's you, my brother. My God. It's really you! Gasps rippled through the crowd. Rodina staggered backward, color draining from her face. That's impossible, she stammered. He's dead! Evelyn rose slowly, her voice cold enough to shatter glass. Do not speak another word. Rodina opened her mouth, but Evelyn's glare silenced her. Then Evelyn turned to the guards. Touch him again, and I will make sure your next job is guarding a street corner. They stepped back instantly, and then, as though summoned by fate, a deeper voice thundered from the resort's entrance. What is going on here? The crowd parted once more. There stood Adabio Andrews, regal even in confusion, his tuxedo immaculate, his eyes weary but sharp. He had come to silence the noise, but what he saw rooted him to the ground, a crowd. Blood on the pavement, a boy, bruised, shaking, but with eyes that felt like a mirror to his own, and Evelyn, standing beside him, her voice trembling as she said, Father, it's Amir. The world went silent. Even the rain stopped midair, Adabio's breath caught. His heart slammed against his ribs. He stepped forward, one unsteady step after another, like a man approaching a dream too fragile to touch. He knelt. The billionaire, the king of towers, knelt in the dirt before the boy. Amir, he whispered, voice breaking. The boy looked up, disbelief and tears mingling on his face. Daddy! And the world broke open. Adabio pulled him into his arms, clutching him as if trying to anchor both their souls. You're alive, he wept. My boy, you're alive! The crowd erupted, some crying, some filming, none daring to speak. Evelyn pressed a trembling hand to her lips. Rodina stood frozen, her perfect life dissolving before her eyes. Adabio turned to her, eyes red, jaw trembling. You did this? He demanded. Rodina stumbled back. No, I didn't, but guilt is louder than denial. It screamed from her silence. Adabio's voice thundered like judgment itself. You laid your hands on my son. You raised guards against my blood. He turned to his security. The wedding is off. Clear this place. Guests scattered like leaves in the wind. And as they did, Adabio took Amir's hand, the same hand he had once thought buried, and led him away from the wreckage of luxury, toward home. That night, the mansion's lights burned bright again, not for wealth, but for reunion. The prodigal son had returned, and for the first time in a decade, Adabio Andrews remembered how to breathe. But above all the joy, a shadow lingered, because in another corner of the city, Rodina's rage was hardening into vengeance. Some nights carry no moon, only memory, and in that darkness, monsters are born. After the collapse of the wedding, after the cameras stopped flashing and the guests fled whispering, Rodina Bello sat alone in the ruins of her dream. The pearls around her neck felt like chains. Her makeup, once perfect, was smeared with tears and fury. The city outside buzzed with gossip. Lagos never slept, and now it had a new story to feast on. The beggar boy who crashed the billionaire's wedding. But as the night stretched thin, the headlines changed. Lost heir returns, wedding canceled in chaos. And by morning, every screen in Nigeria glowed with the same picture. Adabio Andrews embracing his son Amir before the gates of Palm Grove. The nation called it a miracle. Rodina called it her undoing. She smashed the champagne flute in her hand, shards scattering like diamonds on the floor. After everything I built, she hissed. After everything I buried. Her reflection in the mirror stared back. Unrecognizable, the mask of wealth cracked to reveal the girl from the gutter again, She poured herself a whiskey and whispered, "You took him from me, boy. Now I'll take everything from you." She picked up her phone. There was only one name to call: Brenda Alaki. Her oldest ally in ambition and deceit. A woman who never asked why, only how much. Brenda's voice came lazily through the receiver. "You sound like hell, Rhodey." "I've been humiliated," Rodina spat. "On camera, in front of the entire city." "I saw," Brenda chuckled. "The lost son. Poetic, really." Rodina's grip tightened. "I need him destroyed. The boy, the father, all of them. I want their story to rot before it blooms." And thus began the second war for the Andrews name. Fought not with bullets, but with whispers. Brenda leaned back in her chair, thinking. You can't touch Adabio directly. He's too powerful. But the boy's new, vulnerable. A cruel smile curved Rodina's lips. Then we'll make the world question him. She leaned forward, her voice a serpent's whisper. I want the public to believe he's a fraud. A liar, a street rat pretending to be a king's son. Scandal? Brenda asked. Bigger, Rodina said. I want ruin. Within days, the machinery of destruction began to move. A journalist was bought, one who lived on the edge of scandal and starvation. His name was Tari Okoye, a man whose morals were as negotiable as his rent. Rodina met him in a dim cafe, veil pulled low. You'll get triple your usual rate, she said, sliding an envelope across the table. Tari's eyes flickered open, the cash inside. What's the story? That the boy is a con artist, she said coldly. That he's been posing as Adabio's son to gain wealth. And proof? He asked. She smiled thinly. We'll make proof. Brenda handled the fabrication, a grainy video stitched from lies and stolen footage. In it, Amir was seen meeting an older man in a hotel lobby, exchanging an envelope. The headline wrote itself. By morning, it was everywhere. TV anchors spoke of the mysterious boy who reappeared conveniently. Blogs called him the greatest scam of the decade. The public, ever hungry for drama, turned suspicion into sport. Amir, who had only just begun to heal, saw it all unfold on his father's tablet. His hands trembled. His throat closed. They think I lied, he whispered. Evelyn reached for him, eyes blazing. Don't you dare believe them! But Amir broke. I shouldn't have come. I should have stayed gone. When Adabio heard the rumors, the old lion returned. I'll sue every paper in this country, he thundered, his voice shaking chandeliers. But Evelyn, calm and razor-sharp, stopped him. No, father. Not yet. War in the light will only feed their fire. We hunt in shadow, the way they did. She turned to her assistant. Victor, she said, find the source. Every account, every payment, every whisper. I want names, Victor nodded. He was quiet, brilliant, and feared in every newsroom for his precision. Within hours, he began to unthread the web. He started with the journalist Tari Okoye, phone records, bank statements, encrypted transfers, and then the spark, a single deposit, large and untraceable, sitting in an offshore account. The sender, a shell company registered under Brenda Alaki. Victor's next move was surgical. He traced Brenda's transactions back to Rodina's estate. He found deleted messages between them. Fragments of phrases like, release it by dawn. And make it convincing. It was enough. But Evelyn wanted more. Proof can be denied, she said. Confession cannot. So Victor found Tari. He cornered him in a cheap motel surrounded by the wreckage of guilt, empty bottles, and cigarette burns. You've been bought, Victor said softly. But money can't hide forever, Tari laughed bitterly. You don't scare me. Victor placed 3 photos on the table. Bank transfers, signed receipts, and a voice recording of Brenda's call. You should be scared of yourself, he said, because when they fall, you'll be the only one without protection. Tari's defiance crumbled. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, he muttered. Then make it right, Victor said, and he did. 2 days later, The truth broke louder than the lie. Evelyn stood before a hall full of journalists, calm, composed, radiant with fury that glowed like justice. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. She showed. The fake video, the forged bank transfers, the confession of the journalist himself. Her voice was steady. This was not a mistake. It was a crime. A calculated attempt to destroy a boy who has already suffered more than any of us can imagine. The masterminds are Brenda, Alaki, and Rodina Bello. The room fell silent, then exploded into chaos. Rodina's empire was shattered in a single afternoon. Rodina was arrested that night, her luxury apartment lit by the red and blue of police lights. She didn't resist. As they cuffed her, she whispered, "You think this ends here? You've only cut the branches. The roots are still alive." But when she looked out the window of the police van, she saw Amir's face on a billboard. Found at last. The son who survived. And for the first time, Rodina cried, not from guilt, but because she finally realized what she had truly lost. Not wealth, not status, but the power to be believed. Back at the Andrews estate, the rain fell soft and clean. Amir sat beneath the same jacaranda tree that once shaded his childhood. Evelyn joined him, handing him a cup of warm tea. "She's gone," she said quietly. "Justice has been done." Amir looked up at the sky, voice trembling. "Then why does it still hurt?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without breaking. Justice is never silent for long. Sometimes it arrives not on the wings of vengeance, but through the trembling voice of someone who can no longer bear her own reflection." A week after Rodina's arrest, the city had begun to move on. New headlines replaced old scandals. The name Rodina Bello became a curse whispered in salons and boardrooms, a lesson wrapped in disgrace. But far from the polished heart of Lagos, in a one-room apartment that smelled of rain and regret, another woman sat sleepless, her conscience heavy with ghosts. Her name was Naomi Bello, Rodina's younger sister. While Rodina had climbed the marble stairs of power, Naomi had remained in the shadows, the one who washed the stains from her sister's silk gowns, who listened when her sister whispered plans too dark for daylight. She had seen everything, heard everything, and for years she had done nothing. Now, that silence had turned to poison in her veins. Naomi sat hunched over a small table, the flickering light bulb above her trembling like her hands. She stared at her phone. The number written on a torn piece of paper seemed to glow. Evelyn Andrews, corporate office. She had written it down 3 nights ago, after seeing Evelyn's press conference on television. That calm voice, that conviction, that mercy. Naomi had cried for hours afterward, not for her sister, but for herself. Because she had been a coward for too long, she pressed the call button. "Good afternoon. Andrews Holdings," came a crisp male voice. It was now Victor. Naomi hesitated. "My name doesn't matter," she whispered. "But I have information about Rodina Bello, about what she really did." There was a pause. Then Victor's tone shifted. "Stay where you are. Someone will come for you." 2 hours later, Naomi sat across from Evelyn, in a quiet hotel room overlooking the city. No reporters. No cameras, only the faint hum of traffic below. Evelyn poured her a glass of water and said gently, "You're safe here. Take your time." Naomi's eyes were hollow. "Safe?" she murmured. "No one is ever safe near Rodina. Not even blood." Evelyn leaned forward. "Tell me what you know." Naomi's voice cracked as she began. "This thing she did to your family, the lies, the scandal, it didn't start this year. It started long ago, long before you met her, long before your brother disappeared." Evelyn's breath caught. "Go on." Naomi clasped her trembling hands. "You must understand, Rodina." She was never satisfied. As children, she used to tell me, "The world owes me everything it denied our mother." But when she met Adabio Andrews, when she saw the life his family had, it became an obsession. She used to stand in front of the newspapers, staring at pictures of his wife and son and whisper, "That should have been me." She looked up at Evelyn with eyes swollen from tears. She wanted his love, his world, his power, but she knew he would never leave his wife for her. So she decided to remove the obstacles. Evelyn felt her pulse in her ears. "You mean Amir's mother?" Naomi nodded slowly. "Yes, both of them." Evelyn froze. "Start from the beginning." Naomi took a shuddering breath. She planned it carefully. The kidnapping. It wasn't random. It wasn't revenge from some enemy. It was Rodina's idea. She told me it was just to scare them, to make the wife panic, to draw Mr. Andrews away from her, to make him vulnerable. She said the men would bring the boy back after a few days, unharmed. But then everything went wrong. Evelyn's knuckles whitened around her cup. What happened? The men she hired, they panicked. The police stormed the streets. The story went everywhere. They abandoned Amir in some town far away. Rodina tried to reach them, but they vanished. She came home shaking. She said, "If they find out I did this, I'm finished." I begged her to confess, but she just said, "Let the child stay lost." Maybe that's what fate wanted. Naomi buried her face in her hands. I didn't know she would go further. The room went silent except for Naomi's sobs. Then, like a confession too long buried, the second truth came out. When Mr. Andrews didn't break, Naomi whispered, when the kidnapping only made his marriage stronger. She decided to end it. Evelyn's eyes widened. End it? Naomi nodded. She found a doctor, a disgraced man who owed her favors. She got something from him, a substance, a poison that mimics heart failure. She told me she'd use just a little to weaken the woman, to make her ill. But the woman died. Mrs. Andrews, Amir's mother, she didn't die of grief, Evelyn. She was murdered! The word murdered hung in the air like thunder. Evelyn's eyes filled with horror. You're saying Rodina killed her? Yes, Naomi whispered. And I helped cover it up. I burned the doctor's records. I lied to the police. I thought I was protecting my sister, but I was burying an innocent woman's truth. Evelyn stood, her chair scraping against the floor. Her heartbeat was thunder now. Why come forward now, Naomi? Naomi looked down at her shaking hands. Because when I saw Amir at that gate, when I saw that child being beaten while she smiled, I saw the devil my sister became. And I realized every monster needs someone to feed it. I was her shadow. I kept her alive. But not anymore. She slid an envelope across the table. Inside were names, bank records, and a small vial wrapped in cloth. This belonged to the doctor, Naomi said. He's still alive, hiding in Ibadan. He can prove everything. Evelyn stared at the vial. Clear liquid glinting in the dim light, the proof she needed, the final nail in Rodina's coffin. By evening, Victor had found the doctor, a man named Dr. Hassan Oloye, once a respected cardiologist, now living under a false name. When confronted, he didn't deny it. She paid me, he said simply. I thought it was just medicine. I didn't know she'd use it to kill. Within hours, the police reopened the case. The charges multiplied. Murder, kidnapping, and conspiracy. Rodina, already behind bars, received the news with a smile. So they finally found my ghosts, she said softly. Tell them they're late. But when she was alone, she pressed her hands to the cold wall of her cell and whispered, Naomi, you were always the weak one, and somewhere in that darkness, she began to plan again. Back at the Andrews estate, Evelyn delivered the final truth to her father. Adabio sat in silence as she spoke, the fire in the hearth burning low. When she finished, he closed his eyes and whispered, All these years, I thought grief was the thief. I didn't know it had a name. He rose slowly, walked to the window, and stared at the rain streaking the glass. Justice will not bring your mother back, Amir, he said quietly, but it will make the world remember who she was and who we are. Amir, standing beside him, nodded. His eyes no longer held confusion. They held purpose, he said softly. Then let's finish this. That night, Evelyn wrote one final line in her journal. The truth is not light, it burns. But sometimes, burning is how we see clearly. The next morning, the newspapers carried one headline across the nation. Rodina Bello, the woman who stole light. And for the first time, after 10 long years, peace began to breathe again inside the Andrews estate. The rain that fell on Lagos that morning was unlike any other. It was gentle, the kind that washed, not destroyed, the kind that whispered of peace. For the first time in over a decade, the Andrews mansion no longer felt haunted. The portraits that once seemed to watch in sorrow now glowed softly under the morning sun. And in the great garden, beneath the purple bloom of the jacaranda tree, Amir sat quietly, a cup of tea in his hands, the weight of a lifetime beginning to lift from his shoulders. Beside him, Evelyn flipped through the morning newspaper. Across the front page, the bold headline read, "Justice served, the Andrews family triumphs over decade of deceit." She smiled faintly. "You made the world believe again, Amir." He looked up at her, the trace of a grin breaking through. "No, sister. You made the world listen." For a long moment, they sat in silence, siblings not by blood, but by something deeper, pain transformed into purpose. Inside the house, Mr. Adabio Andrews stood before the grand piano that had remained untouched since his wife's death. He lifted the lid slowly, fingers trembling as they brushed the ivory keys. He played, not a melody of sorrow, but of remembrance. The notes rose softly, rapping through the hallways like forgiveness-given sound, and as he played, tears fell, not heavy ones of grief, but light ones. Like the sky had been waiting for this moment to rain through him. When the last note faded, he whispered to himself, "Finally, she can rest." Later that afternoon, Evelyn called Amir out into the garden. She handed him a small leather-bound folder. "What's this?" he asked. "Your mother's foundation papers," she said. "I found them locked in Father's study. She wanted to create a place for children who had no homes, who were lost like you once were. I think it's time we finish what she started." Amir opened the folder. The title read, "The Bright Seed Foundation, a place where every lost child finds light." He looked up, eyes glistening. She wanted to save others. Even when she was dying, Evelyn nodded. She planted a seed. Now we make it grow. Weeks passed, and the foundation took shape, not in the glittering towers of the city, but in the quiet heart of its forgotten corners. They built schools where abandoned buildings once stood, and shelters where laughter began to echo again. Children came, hungry, frightened, hopeless, and when they met Amir, they didn't see a billionaire's son. They saw someone who had walked through darkness and found his way home. To them, he was proof that survival was not just luck, it was destiny's mercy. Evelyn oversaw the operations, her sharp mind shaping plans with military precision, while Amir became the heart of it all, the storyteller who reminded each child, "You are not forgotten. The world remembers you through us." One evening, Adabio visited the new foundation building. It was painted in warm tones, filled with the sound of children reading aloud. As he stepped inside, the scent of wet earth and books mixed like prayer. He found Amir sitting on the floor with a group of orphans, helping them draw maps of their dreams. Adabio watched quietly, his heart swelling with something he hadn't felt in years, pride untainted by power. When Amir finally noticed him, he stood and smiled shyly. "You're early. I couldn't wait," his father said. "I wanted to see the light you've built." He placed a hand on Amir's shoulder. "You've turned our pain into purpose, my son." "That's the truest wealth," Amir smiled faintly. "Mother would have wanted it this way." Adabio looked toward the ceiling, whispering, "She always saw farther than we did." As the sun dipped low, painting gold across the courtyard, Evelyn joined them. The three of them stood together, father, daughter, and son watching the children chase one another under the jacaranda tree. For once, there was no past, only peace, and the wind carried a familiar sound, laughter. The same laughter that once filled these halls before fate intervened. Amir closed his eyes, breathing in the moment. In the rhythm of the children's joy, he heard something sacred, the heartbeat of his mother, still echoing in the world she had left behind. Across the city, in a small prison cell, Rodina Bello sat alone, staring at the wall where the light refused to reach. Her once perfect hair had turned dull, her voice hoarse from silence. She no longer plotted, no longer raged. Instead, she traced names on the wall, Adabio, Amir, Evelyn, over and over until her fingers bled. Sometimes she laughed softly to herself. Sometimes she wept, and when the guards asked her why, she only said, "I thought power would make me remembered, but love made them eternal." She turned toward the small window where a beam of sunlight crept through. For a fleeting moment, she whispered, "Maybe one day, even I will be forgiven." Back at the Andrews estate, the family gathered for dinner under the stars. The table was full, not of gold and silver, but of laughter and stories. The servants who had once moved like shadows now smiled freely. Adabio raised his glass, voice steady and warm. "To the ones we lost, and the light they left behind," Evelyn added softly, "to the truth that saved us." Amir looked around the table, his heart full, and said, "To new beginnings, and to never letting darkness silence love again." They clinked glasses, and somewhere above them, the wind carried the faint scent of lilies, the same flowers his mother once grew in the garden. It was as if the world itself was saying, "It is done." That night, as the moon rose high over Lagos, Amir wrote in his mother's old journal, "Once, I was lost in the dark, searching for the gate that led home. I thought the world had forgotten me, but I've learned. The world never forgets those who carry light in their scars. I am my mother's son, and every lost child who finds hope here. Is her heartbeat continuing in the world?" He closed the book, placed it on the windowsill, and whispered, "Rest. Mama, we're home now." The story ends not with wealth regained, nor revenge completed, but with love resurrected from ashes. Because in every African heart, the old wisdom still holds true. The child who walks away from light will learn his way back through fire. And when he does, the fire becomes his halo. Before you go further, take a moment to breathe. If this story touched your heart, go hit that subscribe button and to tell us where in the world you're watching from. Lagos, Nairobi, Johannesburg, London, or somewhere under the same moon where love still conquers darkness. Because this is not just a tale of wealth and betrayal. It's a reminder that forgiveness is the final victory. And light always finds its way home.